Good evening, everyone. My name is Rob Mortimer. I'm the Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Research and International here at York St John University, and I'm delighted to welcome you to Alison Laver Fawcett's inaugural lecture. Alison is a professor in occupational therapy in the School of Science, Technology and Health, and she leads the Health, Wellbeing and Participation Research Group. She qualified as an occupational therapist in 1986 and has worked as an occupational therapy clinician, a researcher, a professional lead, a service improvement lead, and an educator. She's worked at York St John University since 2008 and has previously taught and undertaken research at universities in England, Canada, and the USA. After working as a clinician in London, Alison was appointed as a research occupational therapist at St George's Hospital Medical School in 1991. Her PhD in psychology from the University of Surrey resulted in the development of the structured observational test of function, and she's focused much of her research and writing around occupational therapy and allied health professionals' assessment and outcome measurement, particularly with older people with stroke and dementia. This has included development of an activity card slot United Kingdom version and publication of 2 textbooks and several book chapters on assessment. Alison is currently chair of the Research into Occupational Therapy and Occupational Science Foundation Board and serves as Secretary on the Occupational Therapy Europe Foundation Board. The title of her inaugural lecture today is Occupational Therapy Assessment for Supporting Older People's Participation in the Things They Need and Want to Do. Alison.
Thank you very much, Rob. Oh, we've got feedback. We didn't have that earlier. Is that better? Yeah. Okay, maybe if I get away from that microphone. Do we need to turn that microphone off? You've muted that one. Is that better now? Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to do what I tell my students to do when they're presenting, and that's just breathe. And I'm going to start by thanking York St John University very much for inviting me to do the inaugural, for believing in me enough to give me the promotion to professor. And I'm also going to thank all of you for coming, and I'm doing that now in case any of you decide to sneak out and leave halfway through, because I appreciate you coming out on a dark evening, even if you're not able to stay for the duration. When I was asked to do the inaugural, I started by doing what I tell all my students to do, and that's read the assignment brief. And then read it again, and then read it again. And it's quite daunting, the inaugural form that you have to fill in. And on it says that the professor can choose the topic. I have chosen a topic that is very dear to my heart. It says that you can include a little bit of career stories, you might include some of your research, but one thing it really emphasizes is that your lecture should be for a non-academic audience. So to my occupational therapy colleagues, many of whom know much more than I do, you've sent me gorgeous messages today saying it's going to be amazing, it's going to be brilliant, it is not going to be rocket science. So I'm really trying to speak to perhaps the people in the audience who don't know what occupational therapy is as much, because when I started out early on in my career, I had this very weird experience, which my dad said, he very sadly can't be here today, my parents, and my dad said, you should mention this. So one of the weirder aspects of my career, I didn't start my clock to check my time, that's my first fault. Always tell my students off when they get their timing wrong. Right, that started. Was somebody nominated me in 1993 for a British Women's Achievement Award. And it was sponsored by Cosmopolitan magazine. So my claim to fame is, in 1993, when I came from my brother's wedding, suddenly I had to go to London for a photo shoot. I'm sparing you the picture, and the picture in Cosmo. And I had to have my hair and my makeup done. And it never occurred to me I'd actually won anything. So I was doing my postdoc in the States. I didn't fly back for it. They were very insistent. I had to send someone from the College of Occupational Therapists to represent me. And it turned out I'd actually won an award, amazingly, with people like the first female astronaut in the UK. So I was very touched. But what it gave me was a platform to talk about occupational therapy. It was absolutely terrifying, but suddenly I was doing radio interviews and there were things in the newspaper. And one of the things I said then was my ambition was for occupational therapy to be as well known and well understood as medicine and nursing. And that was in 1993. And here we are in 2003, and I'm really sad to say I know we haven't achieved that yet. So you've given me a public audience, so what am I going to talk about? I'm going to wax lyrical about the power of occupation for our well-being and our health, and the amazing things that occupational therapists can do to help people maximize their health and well-being. So when I went to Vanessa's inaugural in December, she made me feel so much better because she talked about the lost sleep and the nerves, which I have also suffered from. I'm going on adrenaline. I think it was 4 hours sleep last night. She talked a little bit about her roots and where she came from and the village where she grew up and her grandparents and what had led her to this journey. And one of the things I've really liked about some of my colleagues' inaugurals is finding out a bit more about them. And when I was thinking about that, I was reminded of this photograph, which I didn't even know existed until 2010. My grandmother, who I was very close to, I was interested in family history. She sent me loads of old, beautiful family pictures, all notated on the back. And in there was this little picture. I'm about 4. And on it, you should have known at this early age what your future held. And all the way along my career, I don't think I've really ever known, like I didn't plan to be a professor until quite late on into my career. But it felt apt today because one of the people who's travelled the furthest to be here today is my brother David. I'm one of 5, the eldest of 5, the big bossy sister. He's 18 months younger than me. And here he is, my patient, lovely, supportive younger brother, sitting on the chair, being lectured to. And here he is, 53 years later, he's snuck in at the back. My wonderful brother has come all the way from London with his wife and my niece and her friend. And I'm sorry, bro, you're having to put up with it again. When I was planning the lecture, 2 things just kept floating through my mind a lot. Very common sayings, kind of proverbs and metaphors. One of them is standing on the shoulders of giants. And the thing is, you do not get to be a professor on your own at all. Absolutely not. And I think an inaugural is also time to reflect on what you owe to the other people in your life. They've actually supported me and got me to where I am at the moment, standing in front of you today. And in our profession, there are lots of giants. They're the people that I read when I was doing my PhD, when I looked at the history of the profession. I've read so much. Luckily, I can't spell, but I love to read. And I'm not going to reel off all these names, many of whom you won't know, but there's 3 people here in the audience tonight, slightly daunted they're here, but also very touched, who are some of my giants. So I'll do them sort of in chronological order. Professor Diane Cox, emeritus, shaking her head at me, but we've walked the journey since about 1986 when we met, has really supported and mentored me, checked my application for professor. I wouldn't be where I am today without her. Jennifer Creek, who I was lucky enough, she's pulling faces too, to work with at Teesside and gave me fantastic advice, not just for career, but some of the most helpful advice I've had as a person, as a mom, has come from Jennifer. And also, if I can spot her in the audience, Professor Chris Mayers, another emeritus professor, who I was lucky enough to share an office with for quite a lot of years with our lovely view of the Minster. And when she retired, she went, make sure you get this desk, because then you'll get the Minster view. And her work with the Lifestyle Miles questionnaire, also really spoke to me as an occupational therapist who was interested in assessment. So I'm very cognizant that I'm here because of everything I've everything I've read, and all the people that have gone before me in our profession. The other thing that kept going through my head, and this came from Tracy, because she's put it at the end of some of her slides, and I just thought, how lovely, is that it takes a village. And the proverb comes from African cultures, and it says it takes a village to raise a child. Well, oh, hang on. It takes a whole profession. In fact, it takes more of a profession, because there are people like Professor of Geriatric Medicine who supervised my first research. It takes a lot of people that support you to get to this point. So people who taught me, the people who supervised me, the students I've worked with, the people who've collaborated in research, who've co-authored, my colleagues that I teach with, they're all the people that have enabled us in our profession to have another professor in occupational therapy. And it's one of the things we've really been working towards over the last 30 years. As we build our evidence base, we get more OTs involved in research, more OTs getting to the point where they, are reaching professor. But I never thought I would be a professor of occupational therapy. This is the class of 1986, at Dorset House School of Occupational Therapy. I was much thinner then, so I've circled myself so that you can recognise me. And I was 20. I had absolutely no idea that I would be standing here all these years later. I had no aspiration to be a professor. In fact, back in the 80s, I don't know even how few female professors there were, and there weren't any professors in occupational therapy. I found out that the year my son was born, 1999, there were only just over 9% of professors in the United Kingdom were female. And although it has grown, the latest kind of figures for the academic year 20 to 21 published are only 28%. So it just wasn't something I even envisaged as a possibility that I could be a professor. Not least because I qualified with a diploma from the College of Occupational Therapists. So I had no idea of doing a PhD. And so I know my journey is because people have suggested things. They have empowered me. They have encouraged me to be more than I thought I could be. So any younger colleagues or any students in the audience, I would say, don't limit your vision of what you might do in your career and what you might be and might achieve, because I would have never envisaged this. So now let's get down to the meat of the lecture, and that's what is occupational therapy. So I first asked this question when I was 14. I was really lucky that I had a mother that knew what occupational therapy was, because her best friend in the village was an OT. And when I was talking about all the things I wanted to do, like I was interested in nursing, medicine, didn't want to be a nurse, didn't want to be a doctor, thought teaching might be good, definitely didn't want to be a teacher, ruling all these things out, loved arts, loved craft. She said, what about occupational therapy? And I was really lucky that I went to see Eleanor. She made me a cup of tea. OTs are very good at cup of tea. I passed the test. And we talked, and she just inspired me. She spoke with so much passion. And that was the day I got the OT bug. And how lucky am I that, age 57, it turned out to be the absolute right career for me. And I still passionately believe in the power of occupation for human health and well-being, and what occupational therapists can do to support people. So, what is occupational therapy? I'm going to start with the word occupations, because that's what trips people up to begin with. And it isn't just work, it isn't just your career, it isn't just the job. Occupations are about everything we do in our life to occupy our time and to occupy the environment and the space in which we live. Not just the physical space, but our social interactive space as well. So everything that you've done today, from when you've got up in the morning and got out of bed, perhaps brushed your teeth. Hope you guys brushed your teeth. Didn't brush your hair though, did you? His godmother would say he didn't shave either. But all those everyday activities, which actually we really take for granted until we can't do them, they're all occupations. So for children, it could be play and what they're doing in school. And for adults, it might be our work, but also our leisure occupations. So that's what we mean by the term occupations in occupational therapy. And we've debated in our profession, navel-gazed, is it the right word? I think it is a good word. I think we should just own it and explain what we mean by it. So we talk as occupational therapists about people being occupational beings. Professor Carolyn Baum, who I did my postdoc with in the States, I loved the start of her PhD thesis. It was 2 words. She just went, people do. And we do. And occupation that we do, it's essential for our existence. We have to do, if you remember, any of you, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have to feed ourselves, we have to drink, we have to sleep, we have to do all those basic things. But actually, it's the things that we want to do, the things that we desire to do, that most enable us to thrive and to blossom. And it's those things that help us form our self-identity and our sense of self. And they help create that sense of well-being, and they enhance our health. So there's lots of definitions of occupational therapy. I'm pleased to see that the latest one on the Royal College of Occupational Therapists website is probably the most plain English language one I've seen. Are you involved with that? Maybe. So, I'm actually going to, don't normally like to read off my slides, but I'm actually going to share this with you. So, occupational therapy, it helps you live your best life at home, at work, and everywhere else. It's about being able to do the things that you want and have to do. That could mean helping you overcome challenges like learning at school, going to work, playing a sport, or simply doing the dishes. Everything is focused on your well-being and your ability to participate in activities. And occupational therapy is also a science-based health and social care profession. And in the United Kingdom, we're regulated by the Health and Care Professions Council. So our students, when they graduate, they have a legally protected title, and they all register with HCPC in order to be able to practice in the UK. So building on that, I also looked at the World Federation of Occupational Therapists definition. It's a bit more wordy, which is why I've explained what I mean by occupation first. They use the term client-centered profession. I prefer person-centered profession. So we are a person-centered profession. We're concerned with promoting people's health and well-being, and we do that through occupation. So occupation isn't just the goal of therapy, it's the means by which we do and engage people in the therapeutic process. And I think that's incredibly powerful, but it's also a bit of a two-edged sword when it comes to people speaking large and singing our praises, because occupational therapists deal with the commonplace. We deal with things that aren't particularly exciting, like going to the loo and wiping your bum and brushing your teeth and managing your personal care. So very commonplace, ordinary things often, but things that are incredibly important to us. But also, we work with people. We don't wave a magic wand. We don't do things to people. We work with people. It's all about empowering people, and empowering people to gain that internal, the kind of jargon phrase we use is locus of control. It's that sense that you are an agent of your own life, and what you do can make a difference. And often when something happens to someone, they have an illness or an injury, you kind of suddenly feel like that control's taken away. And so if an occupational therapist has really done a good job, the person won't go away and say, oh, my OT was amazing, they made a magic wand and they did this, because that person will have felt that they have done it for themselves. They will have been empowered in their own recovery, in their own rehabilitation, in their own reablement. So we use occupational therapists. We don't just work with individuals, we also do group work. We also sometimes work at community level and population level. I think there's a much bigger role for occupational therapists in public health. And underpinning all of this is our own science, occupational science, which is a very strong part of our curriculum here for occupational therapists at York St John. And Elizabeth Yerkser very simply defined this as the study of humans as occupational beings. And occupational science has lots of occupational therapists working in that field, but also we are joined by people from other fields, anthropology, human geography. There's all sorts of other people who are interested in this science of us as occupational beings. So you might be going to sleep by now, so let's do the first interactive task. I want you to think about yourself as an occupational being. Think about what you do, and I'm going to ask you to choose 3 activities or occupations and write these down. The first one is something that's really important to you that you can do independently. What would you find really challenging or hard if somebody had to help you do this activity or this thing? Well, you can do that. I'm doing my time check. Right, number 2, an occupation that you love. Hopefully, you all have at least one thing, if not more, in your life that is a passion that you really love to do. You know when you're so immersed in doing something and suddenly it's like you look up and you think, oh my goodness, is that the time? The time just flew. And a psychologist whose name I can never pronounce, so I'm sorry if it's wrong, I think it's Csikszentmihalyi. Yeah, I get a nod from Jennifer. He talked about this concept of flow. When we're really absorbed in an occupation that's truly meaningful to us, that we love and we're engaged in, we just get into the moment and we get into the flow of it. And we hear quite a lot in sort of mental health this term about being mindful. You know, when you're really in flow with an occupation, you're very mindful. You know, the stresses and the worries and the things that you're doing elsewhere in your life can just slip away, and that really gives us a sense of meaning and well-being. So I want you to write down one of those. Now, it may be that number 2 is a social occupation that you do with other people, but it could be something you do on your own. But 3 has to be something that is social that you do with other people. So I want you to write down something that you really love, your favourite social occupation. It's all right, you can write clubbing down, B. Now, is anybody willing to share one of their number 1 activities? Shout it out. Yes, you will? Thank you, Caroline. What's your number 1 activity?
Mine was walking.
Walking.
I really love it, and because it would be so hard, I know, to have assistance with
walking. Thank you. Somebody else put their hand up somewhere. Who else will share a number 1 activity? Yes, Tracy. Cooking a meal for others. It's one of those giving activities, isn't it? Yeah. Yes. Toileting. Do you know? That's my number 1 too. Yeah, toileting. And I had an experience a couple of years ago when I needed an arthroplasty on my right knee. And I had all the briefing from the anaesthetist about the general anaesthetic. And then he said, is there anything you're worried about? And I went, yeah, the GA. And he said, why? And I'm like, well, I've got asthma and I'm really overweight. And he said, well, why not a spinal? I'm like, the surgeon said I couldn't have a spinal. I want a spinal. So I had a spinal, which was brilliant because I was able to say, oh, am I going to get to see inside my knee? And they went, no, and put up the screen. I'm digressing. And then I went, I really want to see inside my knee. So the surgeon popped his head round and said, you're not going to faint on me, are you? And I'm like, no, I'm an occupational therapist. I'd been in like total hip replacement surgery when I was a kid. I want to see inside my knee. So that was all fantastic until afterwards, when I was still really numb, I said, I really think I'm going to need the loo. And what I hadn't realised was I'd already gone. And I'm lying on a bed, and they said, I'm really, sorry to tell you, but had she gone already? And of course I was wet, and people had to help me. And I remember feeling embarrassed, and I kept apologising, and I was mortified. And this little educator, OT voice in me is going, capture this feeling, remember what this feels like. Because this is so important, what this feels like, and how important it is to be able to be independent in toileting. Okay, so let's go to number 2. Anybody willing to share what their number 2 activity was? Yes, Karen. African drumming. I might have guessed that for you. Fantastic. Anybody else willing to share their? Embroidery, yes. Lovely. And Kerry? Tap dancing. Us OTs, we have a lot of hidden talents, So I was really worried about the whole thing where they say your inaugural has to be entertaining because I don't tell jokes. And the only jokes I tell is when somebody else has written them, when I've been in pantomimes with my kids. So that really scared me in the inaugural briefing. Anybody else, a number 2 activity? Gardening. Oh, I love gardening. That was nearly my number 2, Janet. It was very close. But I love gardening too. I get into flow with gardening. It's been a real saviour for me when I had long COVID. So number 3, what was people's number 3 activity? Anybody want to share their favourite social activity? Yes, Lukey.
Board games with friends.
Oh, wait till you see my number 3. So Lucas is my son. Anybody else a number 3 activity?
It's got to be singing.
It's got to be singing. Well, singing's my number 2. So these were my 3. I've already said toileting and having someone to have to clean me. I would find that, I know I'm going to find that really hard if that happens. My second one was singing and being a member of a choir. I have a long-term health condition and I live in constant pain. I've had it 12 years, 24/7, every waking moment I am in pain, multiple parts of my body. And so singing really helps me. I do it on my own. I do it when people don't realise I'm singing. Poor Diane's got 2 weeks with me in March in Venice in an apartment. She maybe, if I don't return, you know what's happened to me. My singing has driven her nuts. But I also love singing and being a member of a choir, and it's so exciting because I've got Dawn and Caroline supporting me here today, who are also members of one of the choirs I'm in. And look, Lucas, number 3, spending time with my children, especially playing board games. And when I was stressing doing a run through at the computer earlier, they've all been playing board games already at home. So those are my 3 activities. So I want you to take your 3 activities, look at them, think about how much they mean to you. And now I'm going to make you do this. You are going to scrunch them up. And you're going to scrunch them up because I want you to imagine what would it be like if something happened in your life unexpectedly and suddenly you either couldn't do these things or you were absolutely terrified that you might not be able to do them. And there have certainly been times in my life when that's happened to me. But don't throw it away. Hold on to this precious piece of paper because we're coming back to it. So, one of the things that I love about occupational therapy and being an OT, let me put my piece of paper down for now, is that we literally work with people right across the lifespan. And so I have worked with people, this was me, I know you might not recognize me, also slimmer, younger self, in St. Louis, Missouri, when I was doing my postdoc in the States. One of the projects I was doing was with in a neonatal intensive care unit with premature infants and their mothers. We were looking at occupations of feeding. We were looking at roles. I've mentioned roles. OTs also look at roles that we have in our life and how our occupations cluster around roles. So today I'm here in my role as a professor of occupational therapy, but I'm also here as a mother and a sister and a friend and a best friend. And we have these multiple roles, and our occupations help us engage in those roles that are really meaningful to us. So occupational therapists, we don't just look at the occupations, but we also might ask people the things in terms of who they are and the roles they have, and we're helping them to get back to those roles again. So we work with people right from the cradle to the grave and beyond the grave. So also we can work with people who are struggling with bereavement. We work with people who are going through life transitions like retirement or widowhood. And quite a lot of our research with older people, one of the biggest barriers they talk about in terms of engaging in what they really want to do is having someone to do it with. So I think that's an incredibly important thing that we need to think about as our society. And sometimes as OTs, when we're busy in a hospital, we don't have time to focus on everybody's desired occupations. We're having to focus on what people really need to do, the essential things. There's a lot of pressure, particularly in the NHS, on beds and getting people discharged home. But at least if we ask the questions about what people really want to do, what's meaningful, what they desire to do, we can do those forward referrals to community rehab teams, but also to people like social prescribers, and to get people connected socially so that people aren't left alone, socially isolated. One of the reasons I decided to focus today very much on older people, and I do have a bugbear that in our society we group everybody over about 60 or 65 as older people, especially as I'm really getting close to 60 now. And yet we don't have like everybody from birth to 35 all in the same services. You know, we have infant services and services for children and adolescent and young adults. And yet we lump everybody sort of over retirement age, which obviously is extending in this country more and more and more, into this great big group. So forgive me if I do use that term, older people. I know it is a problem as a term, but we know across the world, and these are statistics from the World Health Organization, that between 2015 and 2050, we're going to see nearly a double percentage increase in the number of people over 60 in the world. And the other thing they say, which I think is incredibly important, is there's no typical older person. Occupational therapists really believe that everybody's unique. One size does not fit all. So in our assessment, it's incredibly important to get to know the person really well, their story, what they want to achieve, what their fears and their hopes are, and really get a picture of them as an occupational being. One of the things that the World Health Organization say, I'm doing what I tell my students not to do, and that's look back at the screen, is that the diversity that we see in older age, they say research shows that it's not random. A large part of this actually comes from the physical and the social environments that impact on people and what they can do. And another thing about occupational therapy I want to get across is we look at the fit between a person and their skills and abilities, but perhaps things that they're being challenged by health or injury or illness, or the occupations they want to do, but also the environments they want to do them in. So we look at getting that perfect fit between the person, the occupations, and the environment. So I think that's one of the reasons why we're so well placed to work with older people. So a lot of my research has been with older people. This test, the Structured Observational Test of Function, was the output from my PhD. And I'm a bit of a perfectionist and an overthinker, so I'm never satisfied. So since I've been at York St John, we've elaborated on the dynamic assessment element of it, and we've improved it. And with Eden Marison, who was one of our undergraduate stars who went on to do a Master's by Research with us, we published a second edition here at York St John. And I wanted to give you a little tiny flavour from that assessment, because that assessment is based on very simple activities of daily living. Pouring a drink and drinking, eating from a bowl using a spoon, washing your hands and drying them, and putting on an upper limb garment that buttons down the front. Use those activities because the older people I was working with on an acute ward told me those were things that were incredibly important to them. They found it very frustrating to be stuck in a hospital bed and not be able to pour a drink and at least get a glass of water when they wanted them. And they found it really difficult being fed. So, and I was also frustrated because occupational therapists are master at activity analysis and breaking things down. And we do a lot of observational assessment with people. And people often think, well, you don't need a 3-year degree to watch someone get dressed and say, well, they can't do it. But there's so much more to it. And one of my favourite articles, which I got Diane to help me download the other day, is called Making a Cup of Tea as an Honours Degree Subject. It was published in 1996 by Jennifer Creek. Still adore that article. It's a real seminal piece of work. We revisited it while I was preparing for this. And I think the challenge is, as OTs, we're not very good at talking about our clinical reasoning and what's going on in our head. And people just don't understand how much foundation knowledge our students get when they're at university, and the fact that we're lifelong learners. We absolutely instill that in our students, that you have to be a lifelong learner. The evidence base is changing all the time. The political, the social, policy-based, technological environment in which we're practicing is just changing exponentially. So you're never going to know everything you need to know when you walk out the door of university. You've got to be a lifelong learner. So I've got a simple little test for you up here. There's an object on the screen. What is it? A mug. Great. Now, on your piece of paper, I want you to write down all the reasons you can think of why someone might not have been able to correctly reply to the question, what is it, and tell me it was a mug. And while you're doing that, I'm going to get some water and check my time. I'm still all right. I'm expecting a long list from the OTs in the audience. Sit for a minute. How many you got?
I've only got 3.
You've only got 3? Oh, well done. There's more. Anyone got more than 7 yet?
8.
8, well done. Pardon?
Genuine.
Well, I have a little list here. It's not definitive. There's more than this. These are just some of the things that an occupational therapist would think about. Visual acuity. Can you actually see the screen? And can you focus on the screen? And can you see it well enough to know that it's a mug? Then we have object recognition. So sometimes, somebody after a stroke, for example, may have something called visual object agnosia, which means they no longer recognize objects that they once knew. They also might have a problem with something called visual form constancy. So when we're growing up and we're playing and interacting with objects, at some point we learn that even if we can't see the handle on a mug because somebody's turned it away from us, say on a table, in our head we can still picture that mug. We've still got that form, so we have that visual form constancy in our head, which is why we can show people objects in all sorts of different orientations and they would still know it was a mug. People might have hemianopia, visual field loss. Also happens particularly with stroke and head injury, where perhaps part of your visual field has been lost. So depending on where you're sitting in the auditorium, and I've even seen really extreme versions. I think the most extreme I saw was somebody, I was doing a eating assessment. They had lunch on the ward and they literally left like half their food on the plate. And I said, oh, well, you're not hungry. And I thought, well, that's really weird how they've done that so neatly. And she said, oh, no, I've finished. And I said, but there's food left on your plate. And I literally just turned the plate round and she went, oh. And that's the most complete hemianopia I've seen. So occupational therapists will use strategies with people, like getting them to remember to turn their head, or if they're reading, putting like maybe a red line down the sides of the page so you know to keep reading till you get to the red line. So we would think about visual field loss. We would think about figure ground discrimination. So that is being able to tell things in the foreground from the background. I deliberately did a white mug on a white background because that's much harder for us to perceive. And particularly when we're working with people, for example, with dementia, we really have to think about the environment and think about how cluttered, the environment is and the difference between the foreground and the background. It can be so hard for somebody, and if you've got a random drawer of stuff, do you all have that drawer in your house where you can't find things? And it's like you cannot see the object for love nor money, and you know it's in there. And that's almost like you've got a figure ground discrimination problem, and sometimes I just have to think to myself, close the drawer, come back, have a look in 10 minutes, you open the drawer, it's like there, right on the top, I missed it. It could be memory. So it could be that people have such short-term memory problems that I said the question, they can't remember what the question is. It's one of the reasons why I put the question up on the board. So often if you give someone a visual and a verbal prompt, that can really help. It also might be that once upon a time somebody had learnt what the object is and now they no longer remember in long-term memory what that object is. It could be attention. I know my attention span is worse with long COVID. Really irritating. I can't just sit at the computer for 4 hours and then go, oh, right, now I need to do something else. I'm having to do healthy things like take breaks. I know we have at least one speech and language therapist in the audience, and so there are problems with language we might have. It might simply be the language that we spoke, that I'd written the instruction and I wrote the instruction in English. Somebody might not speak English, but they might have dysphasia or dysarthria. So with some problems, people might know it's a mug but really struggle with finding the word. And word finding is something I've experienced with long COVID that drives me absolutely crazy. It's also worse when I'm stressed. It was terrible today. I was getting really anxious that I might not find words today up on the stage. So just, trying to find the right word in your head, that feeling like something's on the tip of your tongue. But also it could be more to do with the fact that perhaps you've got a paralysis in part of your face, and there's problems with moving your lips and your tongue to make the sounds, and you're trying to speak but people can't hear you properly, so that's dysarthria. It could be hearing acuity, so someone hadn't heard. It could be the cultural relevance of the object that you're using. And then not very many of you said mug straight away, so it could be motivation, It could be anxiety. Well, this is such an obvious question, it's a trick question. I'm not going to say it's a mug in case it's a trick question. It could be boredom already, or it could be someone's mood, so someone's feeling really depressed. And this is not an exhaustive list. So occupational therapists, they learn about occupation in that kind of really broad sense and people's roles and about the environment, but they also learn about movement and muscles and anatomy and all the motor components that you need to do an activity. They learn about perception and cognition and sensation. They learn to think about cultural issues. And when you see an OT just looking like they're sitting watching somebody making a cup of tea, all this reasoning is going on in their head. Oh, they got stuck there, exactly there. Why do I think that is? Well, I've got these hypotheses, and then they're going to test them out. And what the structured observational test of function did was it tried to break all of that down and put it on paper, standardized the first bit of it, went through loads of studies, reliability, validity, normative studies, but I also looked at clinical usefulness and face validity. It's a big bugbear of mine that we still don't have enough standardized outcome measures, particularly used in occupational therapy. And the biggest problem is about clinical usefulness. We've got very busy NHS, so if they take too long, that's going to be a problem. They're expensive to buy with limited budgets, that's going to be a problem. If you have to go and train for a week to use them, that's a problem. But if we think it's really contrived and it's going to make our patient or our client feel uncomfortable, that might be a problem. If we've done an initial interview and we've built rapport and we've tried to really build trust with this person, and then we sit them down in front of a very formal assessment with lots of tasks to do, and when they go, oh, what was that? We say something really bland like, oh, do what you think's best. It's going to feel uncomfortable. We all find it hard to be tested and to put on the spot. So I'm also really interested in, and quite a few of the studies we've done is about what's called face validity. And Eden did a lovely study for her master's degree where people with stroke on an inpatient ward did the structured observational test of function, and then they were interviewed by someone else to find out how they felt doing it, what they thought about it. And actually we discovered people learnt a lot from it. It helped people gain insight into what they could and couldn't do. They didn't mind being asked to do everyday activities that felt relevant to what they really needed to do. And I think we need to do more of that kind of study. The other thing that the SOTOF has is called a graduated mediation protocol. So with the standardization, you look at what people can and can't do. And, but then if they can't do it, you don't just leave them hanging, failing. So what occupational therapists are also interested in is what would help that person to be able to then do it. So we start with the least intrusive option. Often it's just saying to someone, take your time, don't rush. And then gradually, if that doesn't work, we'll try a more direct prompt, or we might change the environment or the task and make it less complicated, or we might facilitate and help someone with a particular movement or a piece of equipment. I'm going to watch the time now and I might skip some slides. So the other thing that we focus on is we want to look at that full spectrum of what people are needed, expected and desired to do. So the other assessment that we've worked on here at York St John is called an activity card sort. And the feedback that we've had from clinicians using this is that they find people who are depressed or with dementia, when you say, what do you like to do? Often people don't remember or they can't think of anything, they're not motivated to think about something. But when you show them images and photographs of activities, then they start to tell you stories about, and even when they say, no, I didn't do that, I remember one lady going, oh, I've never done fishing. Oh, but my dad used to love to fish. And I used to get this lovely reminiscence of going with their father to a picnic and going fishing. So it wasn't an activity you want to get back to, but as somebody with dementia as an OT, you can think, oh, well, that might be an important area for reminiscence. So with the activity card sort, we don't just focus on personal activities like the SOTOF, but also it has a wide range of leisure activities and social activities and cultural activities in it. And we engaged with older people themselves to tell us what were the important activities that needed to be included for a UK version, because there is an American version that was developed by my mentor in the States I did my postdoc with, and she gave me permission to do this version because we don't say things like going to get gas, we get petrol and diesel. And we don't tend to go to baseball and American football matches, and we don't drive our car sitting on that side, which could be really confusing if it's a photo for somebody with dementia. So people then, this assessment's used in, can be used in a hospital, it can be used in a day hospital, it can be used in people's own homes. It's also used not just by OTs, but activity coordinators in care homes. So it's so important that we engage with people in terms of, when they move into long-term care, that we still think about what they really want to do. Think about your crumpled piece of paper and we find out what's meaningful to them and try and find ways for them to carry on doing those things. So I, as I mentioned, have experienced health problems myself, and that means that I've actually been on the receiving end of occupational therapy. So I don't just stand here as an occupational therapist telling you that occupational therapy is an incredibly important and useful profession. I know firsthand from an amazing OT I had in the chronic pain service, an amazing OT I worked with in the chronic fatigue service, that occupational therapy can give you hope. It can help you find ways to do activities. It can help you decide what's less important. Today my cleaner's been there and she's been ironing and making beds, and that wasn't super important for me to get back in my life, I have to admit. But being able to sing again, being able to garden again, those things mattered to me. And I want you to kind of think about your crumpled piece of paper now. I want you to get it and look at it. And I know it's going to be crumpled because, maybe you've gone through a really challenging life experience, or maybe even like me, you've got to face still living with quite a challenging long-term condition. So it's a bit crumpled, it's a bit worn, but let's just open it up a bit. Because when I was diagnosed with chronic long-term pain syndrome, fibromyalgia, I decided to step down from being head of programme here. I thought I would go back to being a senior lecturer. And I was on the Royal College of Occupational Therapists Council as an elected member for international affairs, and I resigned from that too. And I was the United Kingdom delegate on the World Federation of Occupational Therapists. I was working with the most amazing, inspiring people on those boards. And I still vividly remember, I can see myself sitting in that study in our old house, and when I pressed send on those 3 emails, I sat in my office and I sobbed because they were really important things to me. And what those OTs I worked with is they gave me things back. So I never thought I'd sit on a board again. And as Rob said, I'm now chairing ROTOS. I'm now Secretary of Occupational Therapy Europe. Diane and I never thought I'd get round to having the energy to write another textbook. It's great, she did most of the work for me. We won't tell them that, but she did. We co-authored it together. We were on a trip to Venice. She agreed to 1 chapter. She ended up co-writing the whole book. I got to go to conferences again with dear colleagues. That's a picture of one that Fiona and Hannah were speaking about their amazing allotment project here with asylum seekers. and refugees, we got to finish the second edition of SOTOF. We got to develop the ACS. They gave me my hopes of, I wondered, would I even be able to work again, let alone hold down a full-time job? I really thought I was giving up my dream of being a professor. And they have helped me. And I have to say, pacing is now a dirty word in my activity. You know, OT's wax lyrical about pacing. I loved it until I had to stop practicing it. But it's powerful. I used to think if I stop, I'll never get going again. But even a 5-minute rest, and what she taught me is, just because you stop doing something physical, you can't just go to the computer and do something mental. It's still activity. It's like got to be a rest. I'm not good at that. I'm not good at just being. I tried to learn more about that when I had long COVID in the summer. But they really helped me get my life back. So the future. There's still loads more to do, though I'm beginning to think about spending more time in my garden and wondering about when I might be able to afford to retire. He's got a job, so he's not going to do a PhD now, which I've got mixed feelings about, but actually I'm going to be better off, so maybe that might be sooner rather than later. One of the ways we're doing it at York St John is through our research groups and our centres. We've got a new institute that's being formed for health and social care improvement. I've got that right. And our research group for health, well-being and participation will be nested with some of our other amazing research groups at York St John, and we will carry on doing important research to explore the links between health, well-being and participation. And it's so important that we still keep doing these things because I don't know how many of you are aware that the United Nations Decade of Healthy Aging is a real driver internationally. It's led by the World Health Organization. And we have so much to do locally, nationally, internationally for older people. So we have to reduce health inequalities. We've got to improve people's lives, not just for themselves, but for their families and communities. And there's 4 main areas of collective action. Whether you're an OT or not, you can all contribute to these in some way. The most important thing is changing how we think and feel towards age and ageism. And if I've even just made you think for a moment about the things you take for granted and what it might feel like not to be able to do them, then hopefully I've gone a little way to getting you to think about that. We need to develop communities that foster the abilities of older people. I was lucky. I was brought up to respect my grandparents, my great-grandparents. I had them in my lives as incredibly positive role models. People have so much still to give, and so much they still want to give, and they want to be active members of the community and valued and respected and given dignity. And we will benefit from their impact. We need to deliver person-centred integrated care, primary health care services that are responsive to what older people need and want. And for those people who do need to move into long-term care, like my darling mother who can't be here today, they need access to quality long-term care because they don't all have OT daughters who had 101 questions and looked at every CQC report. So occupational therapists then, they will ask you not just what's the matter, but what matters to you. And what they do is they don't just give you more years to live, they look at giving you life in those years. And that's where I'm going to stop. I went a bit over, Diane told me it was my prerogative. Yes.
We've got a bit late, but let's have a couple of questions. Who's got a question?
Stun them into silence. They want the drinks in the foyer.
They do.
I have a question.
Oh no, Diane.
Microphone's coming.
So my question is,
and I think this is important for us all to think about, is what would you have told your younger self? So if you knew what you knew now, what would you have told your younger self?
You're capable of so much more than you think you are. It doesn't matter if you can't spell. Oh my goodness, am I glad this inaugural's over, because I still haven't learnt to spell inaugural. I kept putting it, because I kept emailing my file to myself so it wouldn't get lost in OneDrive. And even this afternoon, I spelled inaugural wrong. So that's good. So if you have dyslexia or something like that, don't let that put you off. It's not going to stop. I think you're capable of more than you are. Network, lots. You know, if I hadn't have gone and apply for money as well. I'm Professor Millard, who Professor of Geriatric Medicine. He said the worst they can say is no, and that's not going to kill you. And if you keep applying for money, eventually people might say yes. You've got a few yeses on your CV, they'll have a bit more confidence, more people will say yes. So it's hard to get those knockbacks. I wish I'd been told to publish more. I published my assessment, but I didn't realise it would have been a good idea to publish every study I did in my PhD as an individual paper. I wish I'd done that. I wish when I did put in my first journal article, and apparently the amendments were really minor, but I was so devastated, I just thought it was no good, and I didn't submit it back, and the editor said to me, those were minor amendments, why did we never get that lovely article back? I wish I'd given it back. Yeah, there's some of those things that I wish I'd known.
Time for a second question. This will be a family question.
Oh, Lucas.
Aside from me and B, what are you most proud of?
How did you know that I was going to say it was you? I'm most proud that I had the courage to step away from academia when you were little and go back into the NHS. And the reason I did that was because of Jennifer. So I remember Jennifer telling me, your kids are going to grow up really fast, and it's going to be precious time, and everything on your CV is in black and white, and they cannot take it away from you. And when you are ready to step back into academia, you will. It won't be a problem. Just believe you will. And enjoy it. You know, I was very ill having you and B, and it kind of made me think, do I really want to be a workaholic academic mom, you know, when I got young children? And then I went into this amazing job in the NHS, evaluating services, developing new services, working with older people and carers and mapping and trying to join up health and social care. I learned so much in those 8 years. And that's learning that I'm still sharing with my students. I'm still talking to students about the importance of evaluating your service. And when a service doesn't feel right, you know, getting involved with policy and putting your head above the parapet and speaking to commissioners and thinking about operating outside of statutory care. I actually think we often have more space to be the occupational therapists we really want to be in third sector, you know, working in charities, working in social enterprise, working in independent practice. We don't have people to tell us then that we can only work on what people need to do. We actually have a space to work on what people want to do and what gives them joy. Yeah. I'm proud I did that. Jennifer told me, and I was brave enough to take her advice.
Great, thank you. It's time to exit for drinks a second. I'm going to exit stage left very briefly. While I do that, it would be really good if we can thank Alison one more time for a fantastic inaugural lecture.